these things. There we go. Okay, so game analysis, finding actionable design in games. So what are we doing here? Let's get into it. Okay, so what we're doing is we are finding design patterns to utilize in our own work, aka we're stealing, except in an ethical, nice way. Okay, so every single game is influenced by other games. Even the earliest games had some influence from things that came before, right? So that's a really important process as a level designer and indeed as a game designer to be able to look at existing games and kind of pick them apart. And just as a side note, one of my senior capstone teams, they're doing kind of a zombie defense game, and they got Leah Hearn on their team, who's an amazing analytical person, and she did a awesome job with like basically kind of doing a market analysis of like I think she called them case studies of like all these games like Call of Duty Zombies, other games in that genre, the unique things they do, and that's what I'm talking about here. This game analysis, like people can get really good at this. So this is a very useful thing to be able to do because you can then build a vocabulary of design ideas that you can utilize in future work. Okay, so the game that we're going to be analyzing is World War Z. And so what we're going to do first is look at this clip, and let's hope that I check these out. They still exist. Whenever I use YouTube videos, I always worry about, are they going to exist next year or next semester? But I looked at these yesterday. So should be popping up somewhere in some web browser. I may have to click on this again. Let me try this again here. There we go. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, you seen this statewide?
Yep.
Okay.
Be quiet here.
Dan, you hear me? We're going for it. Try the subway to inlet. Over.
Okay, I think we could probably stop here and think about what we have seen so far. Okay, so this is like the first minute of gameplay in the New York City map. So let's talk about some of the things that we can pull apart here. So players start in a safe area. Notice you're on the roof and the character has to remove those boards from the door. Now, a lot of times when you're playing a game, right, these sorts of interstitial minor interactions, they really do seem like, why are they even there, right? Like what's the purpose of this? Now, on a broad view, what I'll say about it is, and it's funny, in CGT 105, I'm talking about penny arcades today, and if you've ever played a penny arcade machine, they're like so ridiculously simple. You put a penny in there, and then a little fortune-telling guy spits out a card, or you grab a little doohickey of your hand, and it tells you how much love you have, or something, right? And you're like, this is entertainment. Okay, so on a very broad level, any interaction at all is sort of pleasurable to humans. I'm not a psychologist. I think maybe Professor Whittinghill gets a little bit more into that area of game design. But there's something about any game system where you put in an input and get an output that we find intrinsically entertaining somehow, or else these penny arcades wouldn't exist. That's on my mind because of this other class I have to teach. But there's another reason for the boards there, right? What we want to do is start you off in a safe area, right? And we want to make sure that nothing bad can happen to you. We want you to have this opportunity to kind of this is like the first level of the game, by the way. So we want you to get used to the controls, how the character moves, right? So all of that is carefully orchestrated to give you a nice deep breath. And I would even argue that taking down the boards, making you actually interact with something before you really start the game, actually really helps with that from a pacing perspective. It also, just from a technical perspective, they may be scripting events based off of that interaction too. I should mention that. Like sometimes those are useful for that. It gives you a hook, an event that you can then make things happen with. And so what you'll notice as well is that once you go down the stairs, you open that door, you get, your first real gameplay, right? You get your first zombies to shoot. It's an easy combat. So this is really classic game design here, right? Start you off safe, bring you down, nice, easy combat that's not too hard, not too dangerous. There's a reason why so many games do this, right? Very few games like start you off in an extremely difficult scenario, because this is just a very comfortable, nice way to start. Okay, let's continue. Moving on here. Did I not make this a clickable link? It's possible. Let me, if that's so, I'll just have to grab it right out of, yeah, somehow this is not a link anymore. Sorry about that. I will have to copy and paste this in the browser. All right. And we have an ad. That's the thing about using YouTube. There we go.
Jesus Christ.
Something on each other. Hit the button. Two elements should be facing it down. Stand in.
Time, man.
That's freedom.
Okay, so before I move to the points that I wanted to make about this, let me ask anyone here, anyone in this classroom, anyone in statewide, what are some things that you noticed about how they're setting up the fighting here, how they're setting up the gameplay, anything at all? Yeah, Stacy. Yeah, I'll repeat that. So what Stacy said is they force you to kind of focus your attention on certain things. Okay, so Derek, I think you had a comment. Yeah, they show you the horde kind of in advance. Yes. Yeah, they give you a new gun before you get to the big horde. Okay, those are all great points. Yes, and I'll get to you next. Yeah, go. So there seems to be set pieces here, and so maybe there's like a little bit of a different feeling than the kind of classic Left 4 Dead, which is this, of course, totally based off of, which has more of a, they have this AI manager that they've made that kind of brings in hordes based on the situation. Yeah.
Start off showing having large, like hordes from different directions to kind of show the player where hordes can come from, and then transition to like maybe it seems to be a slug trickle from all directions to get the whole party involved.
Yeah, so they're showing, they're kind of telegraphing to the player where the zombies can come from before they begin to really bring them in from all the different directions. So there's this process of kind of training the player about how the gameplay is going to work. Yeah, one more, Stacy. Yeah, they let you explore the area. They don't just immediately dump the zombies on your head. So there's actually a lot of really nice. We talk about this a little bit later in one of the lectures I do. But oh yeah, go ahead before I get into that. Ah,
It basically gives you more opportunities to react and to defend yourself rather than just have it just go straight away once they get past that initial.
right. So what Nick said in the chat, thank you for noticing this. There's obstacles, so the zombies have to path around things. In addition to just running straight at you. These are all good, all very very good points. So let me go to PowerPoint here. Oh, no, stop. There we go. Okay, and some of these are going to be things that you already said, which is great. So yes, one of the things I would notice is that you have really good. This is something we're going to be talking about later when we start referring to the Bruce Block book that I suggest, which is tight spaces, contrast, and affinity. Right. So basically, that's just this idea that sometimes you want things to be samey. Right. That would be affinity. Sometimes you want contrast. Right. And oftentimes contrast is excitement. Right. Anytime you change anything, you generate kind of excitement from that. When anything has affinity, you generate calm. And one of the things that we can do as a level designer, we have tremendous control over contrast and affinity because we're putting all the pieces together in the game, right? And so when you look at this layout, there's awesome contrast in the spatial sequencing. You have tight spaces, hallways, and you have really large spaces, that atrium. And that is, I think, very, very effective, right? To create kind of player excitement. They don't even necessarily understand consciously. It just feels good to go from little hallway, big area. And they do that very well here in this level. As some of you already pointed out, you see the danger before encountering it. This is something I think World War Z does very, very well, right? You go into that atrium and you see this massive herd outside. They're not on you yet, but you know they're going to be getting to you. But they're not on you yet, though, right? So you get this opportunity to see what's coming. And the encounters play out that way as well, right? If you notice, you get to the atrium, you see the zombies piling up there, and the players trying to throw grenades to make them fall down, right? That kind of herd management, keeping them away from you, that's a huge part of the gameplay here. And the other thing that you'll notice that I think is really important to this style of game is that they provide, this is not a resource management sim, right? This is not even like survival horror where it's like you have 10 bullets and you got 12 zombies in the room. How are you going to manage, right? That's kind of a classic survival horror problem. And now you're like, okay, I'm going to get out my hunting knife or try to take a few out that way. No, this is not doing that. This is, we are going to give you all the tools you might desire, ammo, health, turrets, it's all there. And we're going to make these big ammo dumps every time there's like a big encounter area where you can just continually, sort of restock yourself with all the things that you need. Totally different perspective on kind of zombie gameplay than, say, Resident Evil. All right, and I would say, and this is why I think this is a really interesting genre, like the whole Left 4 Dead, Left 4 Dead 2, World War Z, Back 4 Blood. Obviously, Fireteam Elite is that type of game as well. This is a really fascinating genre that's kind of emerged because it's an action game that does kind of change some of the rules, some of these design traditions that we normally do in action games. And one of the things that they do that's a little different is they move where the ammo and all the goodies are usually. Like when you play your typical linear kind of classic action game, like you're playing something like maybe even a Gears of War or any standard action game, single player, you get this classic, hey, here's all the items, here's a bunch of health items, here's a bunch of power-ups or whatever, and it's usually placed before the big boss encounter. In fact, that's always kind of this thing that happens where you see a bunch of goodies and you're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen in the next room, right? That's kind of a design, maybe rule isn't the right word, tradition might be a better word. Here, they've changed that where all the goodies are in the place where you're fighting, right? And not only that, they are not one use only, but they're continual use usually. Like you can just keep restocking your ammo, you keep going back, and you just keep going back to the same ammo dump again and again. So that's just a difference. It's not a massive difference, but it's an interesting, subtle difference in how they're staging their gameplay. And I do think it creates a different feeling. They're not forcing you to manage your resources. That's not the gameplay they're going for, right? It's more about your resourcefulness with those near infinite resources. Obviously, the placeable turrets, things like that, those aren't infinite, but the ammo is. And it's about other aspects of the gameplay. Now, like I said, again, they give you a lot more resources than even regular action games, much less survival horror. Now, I want you to imagine, okay, because what happens when we're doing this game analysis stuff is that all these things seem so readily apparent now, right? Because there's now 5 or 6 games at least in this genre. It's a well-established genre now. These games are very popular. But I want you to try to imagine, if you can, that we've never made any of these before, right? And all we had were standard action game formulas. So you're in a boardroom at a company and you're trying to come up with a new take on this, and you raise your hand and you say, "Hey, I want to have basically infinite ammo to the player," right? And then designer next to you, because they're trained in all the standard action game conventions, where you don't have infinite ammo, where you're not providing just sort of all these supplies, they're going to raise their hand and go, "Well, that's horribly unbalanced," right? What do you say to that person? Imagine these games didn't exist. You don't have an example. Yeah.
Target prioritization.
That's a great answer. I'll make sure Statewide hears that. It's not about inventory management. It's about target prioritization, right? In other words, you have to point out really precisely what that gameplay is that you want in a very objective way, right? And that's how, as a designer, you're going to be able to win these debates that you're going to have in your career if you ever want to do something different, right? You're going to have to learn how to communicate in a very clear, objective way what you're going for, because we are humans, we are creatures of habit. Anytime you try to make anything, you're always going to try to make it just like the things that came before it. Any tweak to the formula at all will be met by, just resistance naturally, right? Think about, the first time, a good example of this sort of mental exercise. Imagine a certain genre of games never existed. You were making the first one. Imagine if you're making the first Dark Souls game, right? Which definitely subverts we're going to start things off gentle, right? No, I forget if it's Demon Souls or Dark Souls, but one of those games, like you face basically an unbeatable boss immediately, and you die right away to go into the little realm of the dead, right? Yeah.
Demon Souls. That one's Demon Souls.
Demon Souls, thank you. Yeah, that's right. And for statewide folks, the Demon Souls was like pretty controversial when it was made. Now, what's kind of interesting, if you know the history of From Software, they had, for them, their perspective as developers, it wasn't even like truly the first time they were doing things like this. I mean, there were games in their past, King's Field, I think, that were building up towards that. But these folks at Sony, I believe, it's one of the reasons why Atlas published it in America initially. They were freaked out by this. How in the world, because again, it just violates all these design rules and patterns, right? And so again, just like you made the comment about, did I just lose something? WebEx still here? Oh, you're still here. Just my screen changed and it freaked me out a little bit. Okay, so again, the only way you're going to really try to win that argument is by being very objective and clear about what your gameplay is, what you're actually trying to do. And just to be honest, in a corporate setting, there's no go away. Okay. Um,
What do you want to do?
Right. right. Yes. Okay. All right. Yes. Go. Okay. Stop popping up, please. Stop doing that. All right. So yeah, you may not win the argument anyway, right? But you've done the best you can, right? But if you are going to win that sort of debate, you have to be able to bake down your comments in sort of these very nice, kind of unemotional, objective terms. Okay. Great. So let's continue our analysis. And I suspect that somehow this lost its ability for me to click it. Oh, no big deal.
Morning already.
Oh yeah, that looks good. Taco Bell. Yes. Thank you for sponsoring Purdue Game Dev.
Red card, never caught off guard.
There we go. All right.
Shit. Where? This will slow him down. Auto turret ready. On.
Reloading.
Fight it.
Shit.
More on the end.
That's back there.
All right, let's talk about it. Okay, so obviously what we just looked at here is like the big set piece encounter here of this part of the game. So I really like this aspect of these style of games, right? Because it kind of is the part of the gameplay that gives these style of games some of its depth beyond kind of the arcade type experience that it's giving you, right? So you have all this prep time, which I really like, right? And you're making interesting choices, like where to place the turrets, where to position yourself, what types of consumables you have that you can use to defend the area. Those are interesting choices to give the player, even if they seem a little simple. Like, you can put the turret here or in another place, right? Actually, anyone playing Monster Hunter, the new Switch one, with some people, right? And they have those. What do they call those? Those rampage quests. Am I saying that right? My mind's blanking here because I'm going off script. But they're basically the little defense scenarios that you have in Monster Hunter Rise. Yes, that's the one. I really like those. I think they're called rampage quests, where all the monsters attack your village, and they're set up as defense scenarios. And there's all these turrets that you can set up and they're like in fixed locations. You can't put them where you want, but they exist everywhere. And it's that same type of thing. I really, as a player, really like that. I really like being given that kind of interesting choice of where to set up my defenses. I just think that's really cool. I think that's really effective. It's also effective, by the way, because you're catering to different types of players with that, right? In the same style of game. Like you might think, okay, action games are only going to be played by super over caffeinated, possibly younger because they have the better hand-eye coordination, action gamers, right? And I'll tell you, I was a different gamer when I was in my early 20s than I am now, right? But when you provide these sorts of interesting moments where you slow the pace down and you're allowing for some tactics, now old people like me are like, hey, I can hang with this, right? This is not testing my hand-eye coordination. This is testing my thinking, even if it is in very simple ways. I just really, really like that a lot. I love the control that it gives the player, right? Like you start the encounter when you decide, or obviously when the time runs out, they do give you some time pressure. Again, they're giving you all the tools. I like that as well, right? This is not resource management, it's prioritization, like you said. And so we're giving you all these toys, we're giving you kind of a playground, an opportunity space for using game design lingo, right? Really like that. What I also like about this and this style of play is the longer sight lines and crowd control. I personally really enjoy this style of play where you have a herd of enemies off in the distance, and the goal is to kind of keep them from getting to you. And if too many of them get to you, then you'll have a really hard time, right? That's to me really satisfying, I think, and these types of games do that very well. It's actually something in the Earth Defense Force series that we try to do in the Earth Defense Force game I helped make, and the other ones are very much like that as well. So a lot of really good stuff here, right? So it's not just see enemy, press the button, and mow them down. There's actually a lot of really thoughtful design that goes into these encounters, and these are definitely design patterns and things you can incorporate in your own projects. Okay, so praise this game a lot. Now, one thing I like to do, yeah.
It's interesting to compare this to this design of map level design to say a similar game scheme of like say Division 2, but since you're against other enemies with guns, like kind of like like since the same general design, like lots of large spaces for the third person camera, there's a lot more cover elements for those behind cover.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is an interesting contrast. Of course, talking about the Division and its sequel, and really any game where you now have enemies that are firing at you, right? And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because I did kind of gloss over. That's obviously a huge part of how a game like this plays. Is you have melee enemies running at you, right, as opposed to shooting enemies, for the most part. So that of course, it makes a pretty big change in feel. Whenever you're doing any game analysis, I think it's really important to actually try to be critical, especially if you think a game's really good, because no game's perfect. Because often your most interesting observations come from this. This is not criticism in the way that like people criticize games on the internet. I mean, this is obviously intellectual sort of critique. So what critique would I have of World War Z? So there's a lot of friendly fire, which can be annoying, right? A lot of players don't like that. Just the chaos, some of the way that, especially the smaller spaces, you're going to get. And friendly fire, by the way, at every game dev studio, that's always a massive controversy, is whether or not to have friendly fire, how much damage does it do. Fire Team Elite got around this by making friendly fire a thing that happens on the harder difficulty levels, which I think is a pretty good choice, actually. But on normal, it's not really an issue. So yes, friendly fire, that's a thing. People can get bored by all these interstitial interactions, right? The taking down of the boards, the pressing buttons on things to kind of move things along. Sometimes, and this is the tricky part of doing these, you can expose yourself, right? Like if you're not really clever with the interstitial interactions, like press button on thing to start encounter, it's going to feel like that, right? You're going to see the scripting in a sense, right? The player is going to see through the illusion and they're going to be like, wow, yes, this is just a thing they're making me do so they can set this encounter up. And it's important to try to fictionalize over that, try to paper over that as best you can. And sometimes, not just in World War Z, but any game in this style, you get a little bit tired of the pressing of the buttons. Yes, sometimes a game like this can start to feel a little bit trivial because of all the resources they give you, right? It's resource overload. And one thing I will say too, in this game, this is definitely not a problem with Fireteam Elite for obvious reasons. The player characters look just like the zombies, right? So that's, again, playing into the friendly fire issue. Now, what I would ask you to do in an analysis paper, which Brantley will be talking to you about, it's a bonus assignment that you have this semester, is sort of what I consider my galaxy brain meme thing. Is okay, like small brain is just writing about how why you like a game and be able to articulate that well, right? That's small brain. Like bigger brain is being able to articulate why you like a game well and maybe even then analyzing problems you think it has. Galaxy brain is doing all those things and then proposing solutions to those problems that you found, right? So let's do galaxy brain here a little bit. Friendly fire, how can we help solve that? What are things we can do to make that experience not annoying to the player? Yeah, Stacy. Yeah. So you can give players roles in the play space that kind of keeps them out of other players' way. And by the way, one answer that I won't accept is just not having friendly fire, right? Because obviously that's the easiest thing. Just don't have it, right? But if we're going to have it, how can we make it not annoying? That's actually a great idea. And there's an old game that used to be relatively unknown that I'm almost running out of time, so I'm gonna have to whip through this. I'll just mention this real fast. Republic Commando, which has now sort of it got released on Switch recently. People seem to have realized it's a really cool game. That old Star Wars FPS where it was squad based, it does a really good job with that. You're assigning your AI companions to these various tasks, and it kind of gets them out of your way. Okay, so just so I can get through the rest of this, let me continue on here. Yeah, and that's an interesting way of handling it as well. Is that the friendly fire can result in getting fire returned back at you? Okay, so of course, not all problems are solvable, right? Sometimes you have to pick and choose the battles, right, that you try to fight in your game dev effort. So remember that. Sometimes the solution is to actually, with a problem, is lean in harder on it, right? Maybe the solution to friendly fire is you make friendly fire so terrible, you make the damage so severe that players are just really freaking careful. So remember, I'm not saying that's always the best solution, but sometimes the answer is to take a problem and just exaggerate the problem, right? Make it really obvious that friendly fire is bad. And again, like sometimes you have realities, production realities. You're not going to have time to fix everything. That kind of goes back to the first bullet point there. Okay, so with the last minute I have, let me just talk a little bit about World War Z and Fireteam Elite because they're very similar games, actually. These are thoughts I jotted down last night because I thought I should probably talk about this. What they have in common, limited set of simple objectives. Keep the emphasis on action. Cold Iron referred to the interstitial interaction as clickies. I think that's MMO developer terminology there. So anytime you have to press a button on something, they would call that a clicky. Ammo dumps and consumables in major encounter areas, and mostly melee enemies that charge you. So they have a lot in common, but they have some differences. Fireteam Elite, far more claustrophobic, far tighter environments, okay? Not nearly as much crowd control. Most of the action is kind of dumped right on your head. This is the last point I want to, because I know we're running out of time here. The big point I want to make, and wow, this slide looks terrible. Sorry about that. Okay, so one of the big things I say in this class, and I'll give you this thought, and then you can go as soon as I'm done with this thought. The level design must always support the game design. And I still believe that's true. I think that's really important, right? I think that's one of our fundamental principles. But I've learned this recently, both from recent games, playing Fireteam Elite and enjoying it, seeing what they did with my content and other people's content, and also from some of my studies recently. Chris Crawford, The Art of Computer Game Design, great game design book. So there's this idea of the player fantasy, which is the player is going to come into a game you make with their own expectations. He calls that representation. And in an Aliens game, what is that? It's those tight corridors. It's those octagonal rooms. These rooms are not great for gameplay. They actually kind of suck for gameplay, right? These narrow Aliens hallways, the little octagonal rooms. But we got to give you that because we got to support the player's fantasy. As it turns out, that's just about as important as the level design being good. Now, that doesn't mean we throw out this rule, not at all. But what it means is we balance it, right? We just have something else we have to consider. We can't just say blindly, well, the level design must support the game design, and these tight corridors that come directly out of the Aliens universe, they conflict with the game design we're trying to do, and therefore we can't have those. No, can't do that. We have to balance it, right? And the way the Cold Iron developers, the team I was on, they tried to balance it is the space station, that's got the iconic stuff. It's a little bit tough for gameplay sometimes, but then you go planet side, then we can give you the bigger environments that support the game design a little bit better. So that's kind of something I've recently realized. There's this player fantasy, got to support that too. Okay, that's it. We're done. Thank you.
I was gonna actually mention Republic Commando, or the fact that if the Spider-Man's getting your